No one pronounced Jerusalem's lot dead on the morning of February 6th. No one knew it was. By and large, the town, not knowing it was dead, would go off to their jobs with no inkling of what lay ahead.
Welcome to Now Playing's Salem's Lot retrospective series.
You'll enjoy Mr. Baldwin, and he'll enjoy you.
Part of the Now Playing Stephen King movie series. Hosted by Arnie.
Sometimes I wonder, why you're so interested in monsters and magic.
Stuart.
He's nice enough, but a city guy, a bit abrasive,
And Jacob.
The boy has a mind like yours, inquisitive and skeptical.
Join us at NowPlayingPodcast.com each week for a new installment of this series, and keep coming back as we continue looking at all the Stephen King-based movies.
What the hell is all this secrecy about? What the hell's going on in this town?
These podcasts contain detailed plot spoilers and harsh language. Listener discretion is advised.
Don't be scared. Come, join us.
Today we're discussing Salem's Lot, starring Louis Pullman, Mackenzie Lee, Alfre Woodard, John Benjamin Hickey, Bill Camp, Jordan Preston Carter, Nicholas Cravetti, Spencer Treat Clark, William Sadler.
Finally someone I've heard of.
Yeah, I think I might have known two of them people.
And Pelu Osbach, directed by Gary Dauberman. Welcome to the podcast, Dillweed. This is Arnie, co-host of Now Playing.
And Stuart.
And this is Jacob. I don't know, take my intro from the other two times we've done this. I don't remember what it is, but I'm sure those lines were used in this too.
I promised you it was real. I kept saying Salem's Lot is coming every time we covered a King movie in the last 3 years. And I think I felt like the boy who cried wolf. At a certain point, you guys are like, yeah, right.
You're like, I gotta leave this date open on the schedule. I think it's gonna drop this week. So many times you brought it up.
And then what's funny is they announced a release date and we had something else there and you're like, well, I guess we should do Salem's Lot. It's like, yes, we need to do Salem's Lot. We've been waiting for Salem's Lot forever. But the suspense you felt is nothing compared to what director Gary Dauberman has felt. Because he wasn't sure if this would ever see the light of day. This movie was made by Warner Brothers around the same time as Batgirl and that Coyote versus Acme movie. And then Warner Brothers got sold to Discovery. And there was a chance this could end up like Batgirl. Just take a big write-off.
Yeah, I think that's the way it was going, honestly. There were theatrical release dates. I want to point out when Evil Dead Rise came out, that was the original date of Salem's Lot. That was a year ago. And they were supposed to come out they shot it in 2021, and then they did reshoots in 22 and knocked those release dates. So then it was 23, and then it was silence. And I really felt like that was when, yes, it was death by non-event. If it hadn't been for Stephen King, I think this thing would have just been shelved forever. But Stephen King, thanks to Gary Dauberman, got a copy of it, looked at it, and said, what the hell? You guys have released a lot worse movies based on my work. Why not put Salem's Lot out again?
I mean, I guess he's technically not wrong. This isn't the worst.
By leaps and bounds. I mean, easily.
Oh, for sure. For this King retrospective, yeah, it's up there.
This is in the top 25, but I don't know that means it's even a recommend thought.
Exactly.
I was a little bit excited with Gary Dauberman behind the scenes, though, because he is the writer of It, which really brought Stephen King back into mainstream box office success. It doesn't feel like it's been 7 years since then, but it has been. He also wrote It Chapter 2. I'm not as fond of that. And we reviewed his directorial debut, Annabelle Comes Home. I can't keep these Annabelle films separate in my mind. I know I just didn't really care for it because I've never liked an Annabelle movie.
He did all of them, actually. He wrote, it's why he got to work with James Wan, who is producer on this movie, is that when they were looking to create a larger Conjuring universe, he says, I'll take the killer doll. And so he wrote those first 2 Annabelle movies. And then, yes, he got to write and direct the 3rd movie, which has some similarities to this film.
And Dauberman has been doing publicity for this film. He's the only one I've seen talking about it. As you guys referenced during the cast list, I don't know many of the stars of this film. I haven't seen them out doing a lot of interviews, but Dauberman talked a lot about the creative process, and he filmed a lot that is not in here, as you might have kind of implied by saying they did a lot of reshoots. His first cut of this film was 3 hours long, and through studio interference and too many cooks in the kitchen, they cut it down under 2 hours. There was an entire subplot of the character Hubert Marsden. You know, that's the house that the vampires are going to be living in, is the Marsden house. There was a whole prologue of that filmed, starring Derek Mears as Marsden. Derek Mears, we've talked about him. He was Jason in the 2009 Friday the 13th, plus a lot of other stuff.
You mean he was like a guy in a hockey mask?
Yeah.
I'm not going to recognize him. Okay. You tell me that, sure.
So there's a lot not in this movie.
Yeah. You know what? I want to remind everyone, Salem's Lot is the second Stephen King novel. We covered these things in chronological order. And so it has been nearly a decade since we talked about it. I did go back. I watched the 1979 Tobe Hooper movie again. I watched Rob Lowe's cable miniseries. I didn't go back to Return to Salem's Lot, but I had those 2 fresh in my mind because I wanted to remember what everybody covered. It feels like each one covers a different aspect of the novel. And yes, this one, just by the fact that it is an hour shorter than either of those 2 TV miniseries, yeah, they're going to have to be judicious about what they include and what they cut.
I did not go back. I kind of wish I had more time to go back and watch those miniseries or even reread the book itself, but I feel like the book is still pretty fresh in my mind because I did such a deep dive on that and we've seen it told again and again, but I am coming to this pretty fresh, and I think that's honestly the best thing I can do for it is not be tired of seeing this story told. Kind of a remind me sort of thing.
Yeah, that was my approach as well. Like, I think I recommended that first one. It had a few cool visual effects that kind of impressed me, but again, this is the King retrospective. I have not been impressed much. I did watch the trailer for this, and I'm like, I don't know, it looks like it might actually be good, or at least entertaining. So I didn't go in totally dreading it like I do with a lot of this King stuff.
Absolutely not. Again, Salem's Lot might be my very favorite Stephen King novel. Hard to know. You know, at this point, this is movie number 83. Who can keep track of it all? It's like book number 30. I know it's one of my favorites. And so, yes, I am more hopeful than, say, Tommy Knockers, that it's going to be entertaining to watch. And that was, James Wan was debating, do I remake Tommy Knockers or do I make Salem's Lot? I think you make Salem's Lot, right? you don't try to fix what's broken in Tommy Knockers.
That said, despite our views of Salem's Lot, which I don't believe I recommended it, and Jacob, if you did, I think it was a minority opinion, but there's a lot of love out there for Tobe Hooper's vision. I'm surprised because I just think it's kind of chintzy and boring, but I think if you attempt Salem's Lot, you're going up against Tobe Hooper, a master of horror. If you remake Tommy Knockers, you're going up against Jimmy Smits. I don't think that's a hard task. You can always make a better Tommy Knockers.
Mick Garris. Yeah, I agree. Yes, it would be easier to make an improvement, but hard to make a good movie out of it. And I will say this. I'll save my thoughts about this movie until the end, but no Salem's Lot is perfect. None of them get it totally right. And I do think Tobe Hooper's movie is the easiest one to love because it has the moments. The vampire kid tapping on the window, the Nosferatu guy with his eyes opening. I saw it as a child and it scared the hell out of me. The disappointment and the reason I think why I was harsher on it than I would be now, but when we just were starting Stephen King retrospective, it is pokey. You remember the good parts. You think you really like that movie, and it's because these moments stand out in your mind. But when you go back and watch all 3 hours, there is a lot of filler. I do believe you could cut the story down to 2 hours. You could excise some of the characters, some of the subplots, and just get to it. So I don't think it's a bad instinct that that's what James Wan and Gary Dauberman are trying to do here. But let's find out. Arnie, give them the plot once again, and we'll explore Salem's Lot 2024.
A vampire named Kurt Barlow has moved into Jerusalem's Lot, Maine. Aided by his familiar, Richard Straker, played by Pelu Osbach, Barlow starts to feed on the townspeople, turning them also into vampires. The first victim is young schoolboy Ralphie Glick. Ralphie then bites his older brother Danny. Danny goes to bite their friend Mark Petrie, played by Jordan Preston Carter, but Mark is a monster aficionado and uses that knowledge to fight off vampiric Danny. Also new in town is writer Ben Mears, played by Lewis Pullman. Salem's Lot is Ben's childhood home. He returned and started a romance with a local named Susan, played by Mackenzie Lee. Ben also meets local school teacher Matthew Burke, played by Bill Camp. When Burke finds the local gravedigger has been turned into a vampire, Burke goes to Ben for help. They also involve Dr. Cody, the local physician, played by Alfre Woodard. Burke and Mark investigate the large house where Barlow lives. Burke is bitten while Mark is taken captive. He escapes and kills Straker. Susan, Ben, Dr. Cody, and local priest Father Callahan, played by John Benjamin Hickey, team up to try to stop the ever-growing number of vampires. But the priest is bitten by Barlow, and Susan is also bitten after Susan's mother, Anne, became Barlow's new human familiar. Anne succeeds in killing Dr. Cody. Ben and Mark are the only two humans left, not counting Barlow's lapdog Anne. The two discover that the vampires are living in car trunks at the local drive-in theater. The vampires start to awaken and attack the humans, staying out of the sun by standing in the shade of the drive-in screen. Mark commandeers a car and uses the vehicle to knock down the screen, killing most of the vampires. Then he runs down Anne. Barlow comes after Mark and almost gets the boy, but Ben stakes Barlow from behind, killing the old vampire. Mark and Ben then leave town together as credits roll.
As we start, you can tell they're compressing a lot because you can't miss the credit sequence. If this is your first Salem's Lot, the credit sequence is going to tell you what is happening in this town, that there is something being moved in a shipping crate from London to this little town in the Maine coastal line, and it's a trail of blood. So as you're watching the DP, the composer, all of these credits, important details are being played out on a map.
Yeah, I actually watched these credits twice because I was focused on reading the cast names and being like, I need to look that person up. I don't know that person. Oh, Alfre Woodard. Oh, who's Bill Camp again? Oh, William Sadler. Death is here. And then I'm like, wait, there's actually something going on the screen that I should probably be paying attention to. So I rewound so I could see all the newspaper headlines and the cool blood effects. And, you know, the score here is actually really good. It's my highest compliment for this movie is I enjoy the music that's going on during these opening credits. It's by Nathan Barr and Lisbeth Scott, and I find it atmospheric and a pretty good entry into this.
And I know we've already seen this twice before, and I agree, like, you got to see these opening credits, because, like, here's the story, guys, like, this is what's going on, yet I feel like they take too long. Like, we know this is about vampires, right? Let's get to the vampire stuff, and they're still going to leave in all that world building for a 3-hour version at the beginning.
All right, let's tackle this, because I do think the common misperception about Salem's Lot is that it is about vampires.
It's about a dead town, I get it. I watched the movie.
No, I am going to argue it's about the Marston House. The Marston House came first, and it is, not unlike Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House, the thing that brings all misery onto it. It continues to plague for like 100 years this area of the country. The vampires are just the latest thing. It's the latest wave in 1975 of something that has involved drunk drivers and fires and Satanists and you name it.
So you want like a whole Marsden prequel?
I'm just saying, and I would say the Rob Lowe version is the only one to really encompass that element, which I believe is central to the Stephen King novel. The Stephen King novel is about an evil house, and a man's relationship to it. And that it's vampires is secondary.
It was definitely an important part of the book. I thought that the story focused so much on the town that, listen, it's an unpopular opinion. You can hear my book review of it that I did back then, but I feel the book is overstuffed with things. But to me, it's always been about the town and the town's own evils being amplified by the addition of the vampires. Yes, the Marsden house was a huge reason for Ben to be there and for why we have our protagonist even in the story at all. But I don't think you have to necessarily focus the movie on that, although I would have liked it if they'd kept in that opening with Derek Mears. I'd have liked to see something totally different in a Salem's Lot movie. I would have liked to have seen more exploration, because this house, it's funny because the Salem's Lot logo they use for this movie is taken right off the first hardcover. The font they use, and in the big O, you see that house, and it's just like that book was. And yeah, I would have liked to have seen something new in a telling of this that I think is somewhere on a cutting room floor.
Yeah, and this movie is set the same year, almost the same month as when Salem's Lot was published. I think I hear over the radio, September 23rd, 1975, the book was published a month later. So they really are trying to keep it in the spirit of where it was written.
And that's something Dauberman talked about. He'd done period pieces before with Annabelle and with It, and something he's very comfortable doing. To me, it's kind of a brave choice to set it in the 70s as compared to modernizing it, but it also saves the problem of not having to have everyone call each other on their cell phones or text, OMG, vampires here.
Yes, it allows it to feel more confined. You know, the internet just makes everything a global event.
And a reason to have a drive-in theater.
Well, we still have a drive-in, but yes, one that people actually go to. But my point is, as we get started here, you will see on the map important people's houses. It will all lead to the Marsden house. You will even read, if you look at the fine print of all the paperwork playing out in the credits, that Kurt Barlow and R.T. Straker have bought this house and are opening an antique store in this town. And that is why there is one more item being dropped off as we get to this opening. This couldn't have been the original planned opening, but when you lose an hour of a movie, and I hear this thing was originally 3 hours and its first cut, yeah, you just got to get to it, I guess. And so this will be about vampires. I am going to say that most of the Marsden stuff is minimized to the point of being trivial, frankly. This will be about a casket coming to a spooky house.
This opening shot, I really wondered if this was taking place in the 1800s, maybe the 1870s, because everything is sepia tone.
My wife asked the same thing when she was watching this with me. She's like, is this like the old days, the 1800s?
Yeah, Dauberman does that a lot. I mean, Annabelle Comes Home. That's one thing I distinctly remember from that. Also a 70s movie, and he just loves the look. I mean, it's really clean and polished. One thing I will say is that it doesn't feel lived in. It feels curated like a Wes Anderson movie, but it does have this affection for 70s bric-a-brac.
It's almost like it was black and white film, and then they just brought up the browns in it or something for this first shot. It really was striking to me how there's no skin tones going on. Everything's a shade of brown. I don't know why they chose to do that and only do it for this opening.
No, next scene, it's all green when it's outside. It's throughout this movie, you will see monochromatic compositions. It's green, then they back up the truck and the red truck lights turn it red. Again, I think this is a good-looking movie. I will say that Gary Dauberman makes good-looking films. They tend to be a little bit stilted. Annabelle Comes Home was not a scary movie, but it was like walking through a nice antique store and seeing really well-curated, creepy toys.
Yeah, the biggest praise I'm going to give this film is when it does those tricks. There's a great night scene when they're getting stalked as they're walking home, which is like blue and pinks in the sky. Like, yeah, that use of color, it is really interesting, but it is confusing at the beginning here because, yeah, I'm like, oh, are we going way back in time? And then, yes, I figure out, no, this is not modern day, but 1975.
And the Satanist house of Hubert Marsden is gossiped about as these two guys drag this crate in. I think I hear late in the film that the Satanist invited the vampires, which would have been a real long decision-making for Barlow, because it's like the guy died in 1937, and it took him like 40 years to come here.
Well, did he have to compete against other, like, mummies, Frankenstein? Like, Marsden, like, had his real pick of what could come to Salem's Lot.
Yeah, perhaps. I don't know. Only the Rob Lowe version do they really explain the Shirley Jackson importance of this haunted house. And maybe you don't want it. Maybe you just want vampires. I think if you're making a feature film under 2 hours, you do want to be really direct with what you're talking about. There's no room here to talk about a house that conjures vampires. But I do miss it.
Yeah, if they never said the word Marsden here in this cut, I think it would actually be more clear. The few times they mentioned the Marsden house, if I didn't know that that was a thing from the book, it would probably just be more confusing, because the person we're supposed to focus on here is Barlow, not Marsden.
Right. So his familiar, Straker, is the one that tasked these men with bringing the casket. I mean, we know when it starts leaking dirt what's inside here, but I was curious, how are they going to visualize it? Because when you watch the 1979 movie, I think everyone remembers that Barlow looks more or less like Max Schreck in Nosferatu, and that was a change from the book. In the Rob Lowe version, it's just Rutger Hauer. There's no makeup effects, really, at all that are used. So what are they going to do? Well, they tell us right here in the opening. The casket opens, and we do see that they're sticking with Nosferatu. It's just going to be bald, bat-eared, big fangs.
Maybe that's why they decided to just push this out on a streaming service this year, because we're getting a real Nosferatu movie. People will confuse it. They'll go, oh, that's the one I wanted to see. Like, yes, because it looks exactly like that version of the vampire.
Yeah, that was a Tobe Hooper choice that they have carried over into this new movie.
Yeah, and it's something the director talked about, because it's not in the book, yet Dauberman has a lot of affinity for that Tobe Hooper version. He says he has an action figure of Barlow from the Tobe Hooper version. I didn't even know they made figures from that.
They made toys of that?
Yeah, it may just be a Nosferatu toy. That look, it's from Salem's Lot. Maybe.
But he went back and forth, because the Rob Lowe version did not go Nosferatu. The 70s version did, and he just decided that he liked that look. He talked it over with James Wan and just kept going back and back to having this Nosferatu-like design, which is why I think we don't really have an actor as Barlow. We have somebody who's done a lot of effects stuff. You know, he looks good in a costume. He's big and imposing, but I think he gets one line in this cut of the movie.
Yep. And yeah, that's, again, it tells you right away from this opening, if you didn't know Salem's Lot, a vampire has moved into a creepy house. And I guess for this movie, that's all you need to know. We get it. Let's move on. And boy, do they move on. They're gonna try to do a lot in the next hour and 53 minutes. So much so that I wonder, is Ben Mears the main character anymore? I know he really felt like it in the other two versions, but arguable.
I thought he was, and then he'll just like go away, and then he'll just come back at the end. I thought he was like an investigative journalist or something, and yet everyone's giving exposition dumps to him. He's not doing any journalism. I thought that was his whole thing. He's some kind of writer. We see him doing research, and yet just make this a Lost Boys film. Just make it about Mark looking for his friends. That's the stuff that sticks out to me.
I think they did. I mean, that's what I'm going to argue, is it was such a big hit. They told him, make it about the kids. Don't worry about this middle-aged man coming back to his childhood home.
Again, I have to think there's more that was on the cutting room floor, because Louis Pullman, Bill Pullman's son, if you can't tell from the smile.
Oh, I could tell. His brow, the looks he would give, yeah.
Mm-hmm. He is top billed in this, and he is really the first main character we focus on. Yeah, we get them carrying the casket into the house, a couple of minor characters, but it's Ben coming into town that really seems to kick things off. We're going to follow him for the first 45 minutes to an hour of the film. So I think he's the main character. I just think he's not interesting, and anything that they would have done for character development got cut.
To be fair, I'm not a fan of David Soul, Hutch of Starsky and Hutch, who was the original star, or Rob Lowe. It has always been kind of a problem that Salem's Lot's main character isn't interesting. But it is interesting to think that this man is coming back into town for the first time since he was 9 years old because of what happened to him when he went into the Marston house at that time. And there's a dead body, and he feels personally responsible for it. Yes, perhaps they filmed all of it, and maybe that's part of the hour that's missing. But by cutting it out, I mean, there are no stars in this movie. So Lewis Pullman, Bill Pullman, I don't think that he has star power. Yes, he was in Top Gun 2 in a minor role, but I don't think that anyone is going to necessarily pay attention to the fact that this is Lewis Pullman. He needs to have something to hold us. And I agree with Jacob. He just kind of goes away after he introduces the town to us.
And this is confusing because the opening shot of him is, to your point, Stuart, looking at that Marsden house, which communicates to me someone that has, again, seen this twice before, like a decade ago. I remember the main plot points, but not everything. So this is kind of just real fresh for me. So that's telling me, oh, this is important. He's going to go on a journey to discover everything about this house and unveil secrets. And I don't think that's what this film is about, but that's what that opening shot of him is telling me it's going to be about.
I mean, yes, he will stop in. It seems like he's saying he's looking for a place to live, but he's specifically asking about this house to Larry Crockett's realtor office. And that's, again, if you've seen the other versions, you know that this is an author who is doing research for his new book. He is writing a book about everything bad that has happened in that house. I don't think that that's how this ends up being framed.
I had no idea that's what he was writing in this movie.
What's funny is the description, when I went to play this movie, talks about an author who's returned to his hometown to write a book. But the way it plays here, I thought he came back to discover his background, because we're going to see him researching in a library about a car crash that killed his parents, a DUI when he was 9, and nothing is ever mentioned of him there to write a book. So I thought he was there to uncover his secret childhood.
And I so thought, we're going to meet Susie here, and her mom does not like him. I'm like, oh, she's the one who killed the parents, and this is guilt, and she's trying to distance. But again, totally unresolved. Maybe that's in the 3-hour cut. Who knows?
Yeah, no, she's definitely not the drunk driver. I think they caught that person. But yes, she doesn't like him because he's an outsider. Even though he was born here, even though he lived 9 years here, he is middle-aged, 35, 36 at this point. I think if I did my math correctly, then it's been decades since he has stepped foot in here, and no one remembers him. I would think a small town would remember anyone that lived there, but he is a stranger to all.
Especially with a traumatic incident like that, where the parents are killed in a DUI incident.
Right. He's a published author, and yet it's gotten bad reviews. And so it's not clear to me whether he's successful or whether he was once successful and is now a has-been, or whether these people read and they wouldn't know a best-selling author from anyone. To them, they're all outsiders. But he has definitely met with resistance. From the sheriff on, almost everyone he meets but Susie is kind of mean to him.
And even Susan isn't the nicest before she knows who he is. He's like, how are you enjoying the book? Well, I'm at the point where the reader decides if I'm ever going to finish it. So it's not just critics who don't like the book. It seems she doesn't either.
Yeah, but to be fair, if she knew it was him, she would have been nicer. When she realizes he's the face on the book jacket, she eats crow and, basically invites them out for a date at the drive-in.
This feels like such a 90s era meet cute that you would see in movies back then. It was so hokey. Yeah, the way she's like, I'll be hanging out at the drive-in tonight, so he'll overhear it. I'm like, oh boy. I guess it's supposed to be 1975, but it feels more dated than that.
You know what? I don't feel like it feels like movies from the 90s. My mom is a pretty frequent viewer of the Hallmark Channel, and everything about this small town, the way that it looks so polished and everyone is so, broad in their acting. There's no subtlety to any of these performances. It's really on the nose, everybody, that it just feels like a Hallmark Channel Christmas movie.
I can see that, especially since the big city guy came to the small town, like every Hallmark movie.
Every Hallmark story, yeah.
Cut the vampires out, and it's a Hallmark movie. I'm serious. But yes, this is, the main love story that he's going to instantly fall in love, and this is going to be the thrust. You know, in other versions, it's weeks that they get to know each other. And here, I think it's a matter of hours, maybe days.
A really corny date at the drive-in.
But she gets to introduce the rest of the town here. And they're trying, right? They're trying to point out people. They're trying to make it seem like this is an ensemble. But if this is about anything, I think it's about the kid. Honestly, I think Mark Petrie should have been. Frankly, if someone says you only have 2 hours to tell the story, cut or minimize Ben and just make it the Losers Club. Fights vampires instead of a killer clown.
No kidding. The best actor in this piece is Jordan Preston Carter as Mark Petrie.
Agreed.
They've done a little bit of updating. They race swapped him. They've made him African American in this, and he's a new kid in town, like Ben. That wasn't in the book.
Yeah, I know. Everyone is new here. Like, the Barlow and Straker are here. Like you say this is a dying town, but it feels like everyone's moving here. By the way, did you recognize Mark? We just covered him. He's Odie from DMZ.
Oh, okay.
Did not recognize him.
We hated that subplot. That may be part of the problem. And maybe he's had a little bit of a growth spurt.
Maybe don't hire this kid because your project is going to sit on a shelf for a while.
Yeah, he seems fated to be in unpopular Max miniseries. But yes, a new kid who is trying to show off his Houdini skills. And for reasons I can't imagine, he just gets whacked in the face by the bully. Just walks up to him, I think for the first time they've ever seen each other, and just sucker punches him.
And this is stuff straight out of the book, though, that he got in the fight with the bully in the introductory scene. You're supposed to show that Mark is scrappy and has resilience and an instinct to fight back. And yeah, this is like most Stephen King bully characters, and there's a ton of them. They are choosing violence very quickly.
But here's the thing. In no other version was he a new kid. So yes, while we're being introduced to him being bullied, it wasn't like the bully just picked a total stranger and walked up and whelped on him. Like, that's just bizarre. But they have to do a lot. They have to compress a lot. And again, my suggestion would be, why don't we just skip Ben? It would have been really controversial. I mean, to totally get rid of Ben. But if you're trying to make this like It, and the best part of the It movies was that first half when they were all preteens trying to fight the clown in the 80s, just swap the clown for vampires.
Yeah, you say that's controversial. Maybe for King fans, maybe for fans of this book, but it'd be hard-pressed to believe there's a lot of devoted Salem Lot fans out there that would cause an outcry if they just made this like a updated Lost Boys.
It is one of his most popular novels. All the Stephen King groups I'm in, this is one of the most cherished.
I'm talking about the average normie.
But including me. I wouldn't want them to screw with this, but I'm okay with it. I'm not so in love with the novel that you can't do something radical. Again, to help it be its best 2-hour self. Because I think part of the mistake here is that they've included too many characters that are introduced in one scene, and then 30 seconds later, they're dead.
Yeah, I feel like that way about the Minister.
Well, the real estate guy is also like that. We are introduced to him when Ben's looking for a place to stay. We never see him again at all, vampire or not vampire, right? I don't think we ever see that character come back.
And he has a major storyline where he's having an affair, and that all leads to drama and vampirism and all of that. He was the one working, in fact, with Barlow and Straker to sell him the house. So he was kind of the one under their influence first.
I'm so torn about giving this movie a pass because I see what you're saying, Stuart, but the movie we're reviewing isn't the movie they intended to make. They had another hour after editing of stuff going on here. And so yes, if you were going in with the intent of making a 2-hour movie, I agree with you, cut out Ben Mears. That said, I don't think Stephen King himself would champion a version of his movie that took away his primary character, a writer of all things.
Yeah, don't make a good version of this. That would really piss Stephen King off.
I agree with you. If you're going to do this in 110 minutes, then focusing on the kid is the way to go. I think they did as best they could in the editing room, but that's clearly not what the goal was here.
Yeah, this movie is edited to montage. I mean, it feels almost like we don't have scenes, we have moments. And there's just flash cut, away we go. Yes, no sooner has this kid stood up to the bully than he's made friends with the Glick boys, taken him home to show all his monster memorabilia, and, away they go to be the first kills.
Yeah, I did watch this movie twice for this review because honestly, I felt like I missed something. I mean, I knew I didn't fall asleep, but I had this feeling walking away from it, like, did I fall asleep in the middle of the movie? And so I went back to watch it again in case my attention wandered or something. Turned out I didn't miss a damn thing. It's just there's stuff not in this movie. And yeah, it feels so choppy, but it comes in a little bit later. Yeah, at the beginning, I'm thinking it's going pretty well. We're moving pretty good as we see Straker walking in the woods and capturing little Ralphie.
Good visual moments. I think this is what you were talking about, Jacob, with the dusk backdrop, and they kind of almost do it like a silent movie. Like one kid's playing a harmonica, but for the most part, we just see this attack in silhouette.
Yeah, and this is where I sit up, I think, for once in the movie. And if I was sleeping, I'm wide awake now because this is visually interesting. There's tenseness here. I'm like, okay, I forgive however long it's taken to get to this point if we can maintain this kind of vibe and tension throughout the rest.
And it hasn't taken that long, Jacob, but we've hopped around a lot. We've covered a lot of ground. We've met a lot of different characters, but we're still in Act 1. It's at the act turn, 30 minutes in. It's about when this should be happening. We have the first sacrifice. Yeah, it's a creepy moment. This little boy in a burlap sack. We know it has one eye hole in it, so they frame it so that he can only see through this one little spot. And here comes the candelabra. Eventually, he's going to be face to face with Barlow, the Nosferatu.
And this is a difference from the book and the other versions, because in the book it was kind of weird. Ralphie was a sacrifice. He wasn't fed, he didn't get turned, he was just kind of murdered. And so here to see him be the first one turned, it actually cleans things up, I think, a bit. It makes it more cohesive.
Yeah, I have no problem with it. And again, I think Dauberman is showing that he is a good visual storyteller. My disconnect, and it was also true with Annabelle, it was like, it's such a good-looking movie, and at no point am I ever scared. So he's not like a master of horror, but he is at least presenting images that are appealing.
He does really spooky compositions. Like, if you need a mural for a haunted house, like, have him compose it. That's how I would put it. Yeah, I'm never really scared. I feel like there's tension. I also want to credit just the sound effects work. Like, it feels like that child is being brutally murdered in that scene. Even though I was actually surprised that he turns up as a vampire, because it just sounds like bone crunching going on.
But just to play the game, I think we'd be on stronger footing if we had all these kids. We had spent the first 20 minutes with all these kids in school, and we had just gotten to know the Glick boys, and we just had more time to establish who everyone was. Yeah, I get it. A small child being eaten is gross enough. I have compassion, but they could have had us care a lot more that this particular boy had died.
Oh, yeah, I don't think you really get a sense of who these two victims are, these brothers, that much at all in this film. It's so quick.
And then a really hard edit is like all of a sudden, one of the people that Susie had pointed out at the drive-in was the local priest who was getting drunk. And I guess he got a DUI because he wakes up in jail, and the sheriff's just like, hey, we got this kid missing. 1 week later, and now there's search parties and stuff.
That was a very weird cut. Yeah, I thought the priest, turned himself in, that was the regular thing. He would get drunk and go sleep it off in the cell. It was that kind of real, cliche relationship you've seen.
He was in a car.
Yeah, he was.
I think that he might have tried to drive himself home.
But that cut is they're like, oh yeah, this boy is missing. Let's search for him. A week later, that search is you don't really search a week unless you have found signs that he might still be alive. That seems like a long time.
Right. And it feels like, I don't know, if this has been story, what's he been doing? I don't know. It hurts this movie that they've condensed that week in this way. But Ben is found one friend. It seems like he's joined the search party. Susie's ex-boyfriend has given him some shade. The mom continues to give him shade. But there's this school teacher who is wanting to pal around with him and agrees with him that cold reality is setting in, that this kid is not going to be found.
This edition of the school teacher and making Matt friends with Ben is really weird in this telling. In the book, Matt was Ben's old teacher. There was a big age difference. They had a relationship before Ben came back to town. Because they're saying now Ben left town when he was 9, they don't have that kind of a relationship. And so it just seems weird to me that these two start palling around. I mean, the teacher doesn't even really know him and is like, why don't you come speak to my class of elementary school students for your not well-reviewed book?
Yeah. I mean, I think you can infer the fact that he's an English teacher, and so he's a reader. He knows this author by his work, and maybe is a fan. I think he has a line saying as much. But I agree, no child's classroom is going to be impressed that some adult author, did you write Harry Potter? We don't care then. Nobody cares.
And maybe these relationships are coming off this way because they've cut stuff, but again, it feels like that meet cute. Just real corny, real like, oh, I'm a teacher that does English and you're a writer that writes in English, like we're best friends now. It's very convenient, like how all these relationships come together, which they got to do it quicker, I guess, but there's no, one of you called it out, there's no character development.
So, yeah, streamlined is one word for it. Bare bones might be more accurate. I mean, it's the argument we're going to have about this movie. Did they cut too much meat off the bone? Is this thing threadbare, or is it just getting us to it? Because pretty soon we're going to be in another vampire attack, and that's the point, right? Of this movie, it's just give us kills.
But these are also the best parts, so I kind of don't disagree with them. I get to this stuff quicker. Like, yeah, seeing this kid, he hears that harmonica and is going to get yanked up into the air. Like, this is visually the most interesting stuff and the most appealing and what I'm here for.
Yeah, I want to point out, in 2 minutes, we have the older brother believing that he's hearing his younger brother play the harmonica outside. And I'll give them props for doing something different. They don't have the brother coming back knocking on the window, but I don't know. I'm not scared by this movie. I have 1 or 2 moments where I kind of jump, but for the most part, they have a problem, I think because they're rushing through it, because they feel like they have to get through something to get to all the stuff. Instead of savoring a horrific moment, we just, again, within 2 minutes, he goes out there, gets grabbed, comes back to his mom, says, I feel sick, gets admitted to a hospital, gets diagnosed with this pernicious anemia, whatever that is, and then is grabbing a blood bag, drinking it like it's a Capri Sun, and dropping dead.
That's my favorite image of this movie, is him biting into that blood bag and the blood going everywhere. This movie isn't afraid of splatter. The vampires are going to bleed when you stake them. Most vampire movies I've seen do not seem to have bloody vampires, and it seems kind of a strange coincidence. We just reviewed Abigail a few weeks ago, and now we're reviewing this, and the vampires have a lot of blood in them in these 2 stories.
Stephen King, actually, this was the scene he tweeted about. Boy, when you see this hospital scene, it's going to knock your socks off. I wish we had time to, see it. It literally passes by within, 30 seconds, maybe 40?
Yeah, I wish we were dwelling on this stuff more. I would say take the knife and carve more off of this. Get to the essential stuff and let that stuff linger instead of, we've already said it a number of times, but yeah, get rid of Ben, get rid of a number of characters so this stuff could really marinate and be effective.
But in order to do that, they would have to do extensive reshoots, and the kids have probably outgrown, they probably look different to bring them back. But yeah, they should have just made this a kid-centric story. I feel like that's what they wanted to do. That's what made it so popular in its first chapter. You give kids the floor, and yeah, it would have meant something to have known who Danny was.
And I'll just say this, someone that is not a King fan, not familiar with this source material, to me, this is a vampire story. If there's something else to that from the book, I don't think that's developed here. Maybe it hasn't been developed at all, according to you, Stuart, but to me, this is just a vampire story, so get to the vampire stuff. If there's more to it, then you got to change the focus and focus on that and really give the meat to that other subtext or themes or whatever. But to me, it's about vampires. Let's get to vampires.
Rob Lowe's gives it the credence that it needed.
Yeah, I didn't like that one.
Really? Because I think that was, arguably better than Tobe Hooper.
I remember liking it more, honestly.
They each have their strengths and weaknesses. And the strength of this movie is it's got great visuals, it's got the highest production values, and it knows how to get to the things that we want. We're never left wanting. I would hardly say that this is boring. If anything, it's just chopped to the point of being obscure. we're just watching vampire montage. We just watch some random kid drink a blood bag and fall over dead. Oh well, sucks for him, but it means nothing to us because we never spend any time with him.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing that is so lacking for all of this is character development. Any kind of why behind these people and why we should care for them. I think Stephen King did too much of that in the book. I thought the book lingered on too long during some of these parts, but here, there's not going to be a single character from beginning to end of this movie that I care about. Least of all is Ben. Ben is the most milquetoast, and he's boring. There's just nothing about him that's interesting. They never explore the backstory of why he's in town or anything. I mean, at least Mark Petrie has attitude and does some cool stuff and plays with monster toys. But everybody else in this entire movie is just underserved, and that makes them bland.
And you talk about this montage, it feels like that, like, Danny, we think he's dead, they have a funeral. I guess he's like an employee of the graveyard, he just falls asleep and then just cut to night, and he's like, oh, I wake up, I gotta hurry and bury this casket, and like, get to that scene as fast as possible, but it's jarring, like the edits and cuts and how fast they get there sometimes.
Most of the other versions have always made Mike be one of the people that was carrying the casket, so you could get to know who he was really early on.
Another M name? Like, I couldn't even remember his. There's Mike, there's Matt.
I know. That's why I want to just identify him as profession. The gravedigger, he's muscle and he just helped carry something heavy. We don't know who those two guys are at the beginning. They never come back. Snow and Hank, yeah, I don't know who they are. But yeah, who's this gravedigger? It's well staged as a jump scare. I like the idea that, yes, it's daylight, everyone's coming for the funeral. As the priest is opening his Bible, we see him opening his PB&J sandwich to see what's inside.
That was the weirdest edit in film history, I might add.
I like it, though. I mean, it says everything. He's not checked into what's happening. He doesn't care about the death. To him, death is a job. I just got to go cover up this casket once these people shuffle out of here. I'm not moved that this small boy died in such a strange way. But yes, through cosmic forces, he falls asleep until it's nightfall, and then he thinks he hears the kid crying to him. I really like that moment where he jumps down in there, opens the casket, and we see that that kid is definitely not alive to scream. Again, I feel like Dauberman knows how to do these individual scenes, but by putting it in as a vampire montage, he's not creating a scary mood.
No, and I hate to blame him for it because, this is not his vision. And I almost feel bad reviewing this as soon as it comes out on Max because I just feel like a year from now, maybe a 3-hour director's cut might be released or something. Like, I feel like the footage is there that this could be restored in some form. Because it's Stephen King, people might want that. But as it is, it's just, so chopped up. And when we get to the gravedigger at the bar and getting approached by Matt, I only follow what's happening because it's like reading the Cliff Notes to the book I read a few years ago. And it's like, oh yeah, I remember this.
Yeah, I agree. If this is your first Salem's Lot, and it's not for any of us, so it's hard to know for sure, but I think you would be right confused about what really is happening and what really the point is and who I should be paying attention to.
I'm having some of those feelings, and I've seen this twice before, and again, it wasn't a fresh memory, but yeah, you feel like you're just missing things. That's why Artie and I felt like we had fallen asleep, because there's stuff that you sense, it should be there, it's antimatter, there's evidence that it's there, but we cannot see it. It confuses you.
And again, the lack of a main character to really dig into. Ensembles are tough. You don't just throw a bunch of characters at the screen and hope the audiences like one. That's really difficult. I think the reason why we might like Matthew is, well, Bill Camp usually is an entertaining figure. I recognize him mostly from The Queen's Gambit, if you watch that show. But he pops up and is usually in a paternalistic role. But he's wearing a Red Sox jacket, which I know is Stephen King's favorite team, right?
That could be the entire reason Stephen King championed this movie, is just because of the Red Sox jacket, let's face it.
Yeah, for sure. So, but this guy being a teacher, loving novels and all of that, wearing Red Sox, it feels like a stand-in for Stephen King. You could have even had him play it. If Stephen King were 20 years younger, he probably would have taken this role.
And let's thank God he's not 20 years younger, because we've all seen him act.
Yeah, many times. But yes, he does cameos in many of his films. But yeah, this one's more important because Matthew is the one that figures it out. And I guess it's because he's read Bram Stoker that he can just see a guy that he knows look pale, have 2 holes in his neck, and feel like, oh yeah, you're a vampire.
It is a hell of a jump to a conclusion.
Start with snakes or spiders. They have fangs too.
One of the few lingering moments in this film is him walking around smoking that pipe, and then he walks outside and sees the guy crawling on the roof. And I think that's where he goes and decides, all right, I'm going to go get this guy I just met. I have no other friends in this entire town. I'm going to go get this guy from out of town to help me.
Yeah, well, maybe there are scenes where they've already been talking about vampires, or you got the sense that in that one scene they had together where they were in a search party, that they were willing to talk about what was going on more than anybody else. Something gets said about the fact that this town ignores tragedy, doesn't want to talk about what happened to the Glick family because it's hoping the problem will go away, and that the fact that Ben wants answers, the fact that he's digging for the truth, maybe means he's a person you would turn to when you suspect your fellow townie is a bloodsucker. But that, to me, is a big jump. I don't know why Bill Camp's Matthew is there yet.
There is a line during that scene you're talking about where they say, seen any good men around lately? And to me, that really stuck out. Like, okay, there's a theme. Like, evil's persisting here in the form of vampires because no one's going to do anything about it, and they just let it happen. And so I guess that's why they team up, because they're the good men in the town when everyone else is, yeah, I don't know. Look, it's hard to find themes here because they've probably all been cut.
Yeah, and I think Arnie's right. It would be so much richer if this was the guy's first English teacher, and they had this long history, and he had something to say about this man's writing career. But yeah, kind of random that he's just knocking on his door in the middle of the night. And wouldn't you know it, even though he was told no guests at the boarding house, he's sleeping with Susie. And they made her more central in this. I will say in other versions, she tends to not be that important until the end. But here, she's going to join in the team and all the investigation.
Yeah, in the original book, I remember she went to the Barlow house at one point with Mark. That was a little bit of something to keep her in the story, but they do try to make her more central to the crew this time around. And that person renting the room who said no guests is very lackadaisical about him having Susan there. The trope I would expect is that the house mother is very upset about this. Instead, she's just like, hi, Susan.
Susan gets around. It's not the first time she snuck in.
Yeah, that's what I like about it, is everyone's into her business. The librarian and even the school kids want to know who she's dating. So there is this small townness about, oh, of course you're sleeping with him. I'm going to let you know that I know you're in the room, even though I didn't see you. But yes, all three come over and they invite a new character that we've never seen before. Dr. Cody is going to pronounce this gravedigger dead. And we know her as Alfre Woodard.
Yeah, they go back to the teacher's house and Mike is dead. And so they decide to just call in doctors and police. And so, yes, we get Alfre Woodard here. And we also get William Sadler here as the constable.
Yeah, he obviously is not a man that's going to accept vampires. Well, they start slow.
She's neutral.
Yeah, the school teacher's like, well, could this be another case of pernicious anemia? And she's like, well, that's not really a disease you can catch. She will be the next one to be converted to the idea that vampires are taking over the town. But before that happens, it's because Matt gets attacked by Mark after everyone leaves.
And this is the silliest thing I've ever seen in a vampire movie. And that's really saying something. I've seen a lot of vampire movies and TV. That when vampires are around, crosses just start to glow automatically.
Dude, they are lightsabers in this.
I dig it. I think this is cool. I can see why you'd hate on it. I actually think it's a cool little device.
Again, if this was more Lost Boys, I think I would have accepted it a lot easier. I agree, Stuart. It is kind of cool. Like, unapologetically, like, these things are just gonna glow, like, as bright as the sun, and I kind of like it.
It's a vampire detector. They wouldn't normally glow, but if you're around an undead, your crucifix is going to glow. I've never around vampires, so I wouldn't know. I'm never around crosses either, if you want to know the truth.
But that's actually not even the thing I was referring to as the silliest, although I do find that just a little bit cheesy. But it also is in keeping with Stephen King's original novel, I think, that the crosses would glow. But there's always been a conversation, you have to invite a vampire into your house and let him in. What do you do after you've invited them? Do they just have free reign now? Various forms of vampire mythologies have dealt with this. I remember in Buffy, you had to do all kinds of incantations and things to revoke an invitation. But no, here, the teacher could just yell, "I revoke my invitation!" And like a vacuum, the guy gets sucked out of the house.
I mean, you could definitely make the case for it's silly, but it's visually appealing. Watching him like being blown against walls and crawling around and all, I think it's visually satisfying. It doesn't feel like the Salem's Lot movie I wanted or expected, but there is something campy, and silly though it may be, there's something fun about watching this. And I haven't felt like every scene has been in this spirit, but if this had been the more consistent tone, I think I would have accepted it.
Yes, I would have fully accepted this.
It just feels out of place in this movie because it hasn't felt like this yet. And while this is going on, we have a similar scene playing out at Mark's house. He, being studied in horror, should know that when a vampire is tapping at your window to shut the blinds, but they do another cool visual thing. Your eyes glass over. Once the vampire starts hypnotizing you, you can't do anything but let them in.
Yeah, that is something also different here. The way that the pupils go milky in the eyes of the people who are hypnotized, but I can't get my hands around the rules of this hypnosis.
They are allowed to hypnotize you. I've seen that in plenty of vampire movies, even to get entry.
Yes, absolutely. I've seen that before. The thrall of the vampire. And so you have Danny outside the window calling for Mark to let him in, and Mark does, but then somehow Mark breaks that thrall when he sees the glowing crucifix and is able to break the spell.
His mind turned to Jesus, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if your cross started glowing, it would probably distract you from the stare of a floating vampire boy in front of you. I'm guessing. Maybe you would stay on the vampire, but yes, he looked away, and that gave him the power.
Because that cross glows so bright, like, that tells me, okay, that's the magic thing that released him from hypnotism.
Yeah, and we're laughing at this, but again, I think it's kind of helpful in this movie that we have these visual effects to enhance the foggy eyes, the glowing crucifix. If this were all just being done by acting, it probably would be too much. But because this movie is visually appealing, and this looks cool, then I can go with it. And of course, this is one of the classic scenes. Like, this is the scene that, is beloved in Tobe Hooper's movie and in the novel, and you just always have to do this scene. Again, I think it looks cool, but I don't think it's very scary.
I definitely think Tobe Hooper's version has the market cornered on creepy. I think his Barlow is creepier looking than the Barlow we're going to get here, and I think his boy outside the window is creepier. It is the single high point of that entire miniseries, is that boy outside the window. I think that's why people cling to that miniseries and say it's so good, is that frightened them when they were young, and it is such a great image. And this one, it feels like you're trying to copy it and not as well. I do like that the vampire's eyes glow. That is a cool little affectation that the more vampires there are, the more impactful it'll be. Like, you know how you see a raccoon in the night and you only see the eyes? That's kind of how these vampires are.
Yeah, I mean, just to put a stark contrast, in Tobe Hooper, there was no digital effects. So you're watching a kid, like, sitting in a floating chair with a fog machine behind him. There's something about the practicalness that, I don't know, it just plays different than modern times where you can make these enhancements and just make things glow and stand out in that way. I like both, and I think that I have no problem with the aesthetics of this movie. I think it's actually its greatest asset.
I agree. That's, if you're going to watch this, it's for the aesthetics.
But unfortunately, and I guess I'm a broken record at this point, this scene is so short. We love this scene. We want it to be super creepy, but it probably lasts all of a minute. If Tobe Hooper lingered too long, God knows that movie could have used some pruning, then this movie has overcorrected.
Yeah, and again, maybe I fell asleep, maybe it's on the cutting room floor, but after this whole little fight, we get another fun little montage with Mark. He's going to go through his comic books to come up with the vampire rules, and from that, he determines he must kill Barlow. Like, how does he know Barlow is the main vampire? Maybe I missed something, but this felt like a conclusion that he drew out of thin air.
2 viewings, and I don't know. He's looking through a book, he's drawing, and nothing.
Yeah, I mean, he read about how vampires work and the hierarchy of power. Did he know that the Straker character was watching them when they passed by the antique store? Could he have figured out that Straker and Barlow are the thing that have brought evil to this town? Again, slower version, if he had other characters, the Goonies, the Losers Club to play off of, if they could have deduced this, that would have been helpful. We do see some pair-ups. This is where characters start meeting each other. We will have Mark and his school teacher, Matt, stumble into one another when they both go looking into the Marston basement. And I think this is an effective little moment. This is kind of a jump scare that works. They realize that the stairs leading up to the first floor have been totally removed. And as this teacher is trying to lift the student up to them, he reaches for the light bulb, and the next thing we see is Nosferatu putting his fangs in his neck.
Best frame of the movie, and it literally only lasts like a frame. I had to rewind it like 3 times because it's such a cool image, but it is there and gone. Do not blink.
My second time watching this, I really was paying attention to the scene, and I think they want to hide Barlow still. They're waiting for that reveal until later on when he's going to kill Mark's parents. And so they don't want us to see him, but the trade-off of that is we don't get this cool kill. It just flashes and is gone.
Not to mention the fact that if you've seen Tobe Hooper's movie, you've seen him. It's the same visual. So again, who are you trying to con? I guess young people that have not seen and are never going to watch a CBS miniseries from 1979.
Yeah, like my daughter, but this put her to sleep, so she still has not seen Salem's Lot all the way through.
Oh, okay. So she was watching this with you and this was a no-go?
Yeah, she fell asleep maybe 45 minutes into it.
Okay. Well, I mean, I fall asleep all the time, and it's not necessarily because the movie's boring.
Oh, no, she made it clear it was boring.
Okay. I don't think this movie is boring. I'm going to make the argument it moves too fast to be boring. Again, as someone that's a fan of the source material, I'm excited to see it being brought to life with this production value, and I'm also distressed that I can't savor any of these moments that are so great.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't call this boring because it is moving so fast. I wish it would slow down, but I will say it's uninteresting because we don't care about these people.
I think that was the problem for her, and it was a problem for me. Like, she really needs to like characters or find interesting characters to enjoy something, and good luck finding that with this. Like, I couldn't find anyone interesting.
No, it's a vampire kill cut. Vampire here, vampire there, vampire there, vampire there. I mean, again, there's a certain audience that will appreciate that. And certainly they'll like that more than they'll like Tobe Hooper's, boy, it's been 2 commercial breaks between kills.
But yeah, as you mentioned, they team up because this is just such a kind of interesting scene because you do get Ben and Susan and the doctor, and this is where the teacher's like, oh, I have more research to do.
Not the actual writer that researches stuff for a living, just the teacher of elementary school kids.
He did go to the bar carrying a whole stack of books. I thought that was so strange. So maybe he is just a researcher by trade. He could be one of those guys that's working on that novel for the last 40 years.
Yes. But again, if Ben's your main character, he's got to discover something. You want your main characters to be proactive and not just be fed information by supporting characters.
He's discovered Susan, and I think that's what has happened to him is he's got distracted dating, and now, yeah, they're both going to team up with Cody. Cody has gotten word that the mom is dead. Not only have the 2 boys died, but the mom is somehow dead as well.
Off screen.
And out of town. They've moved her body somewhere else because the coroner in Salem's Lot isn't even answering the phone, probably because he's dead. or a vampire, but they go there after sunset to see what might happen to the body, and we have another vampire attack.
Yeah, this one feels a long time coming, but it is a really cool visual when she's finally waking up and she goes and attacks Cody, and you get Susan and Ben pulling on this sheet, so it's almost like this spandex kind of cloth stretching over her face, and I don't hear other vampires talk like this, but she has a really modulated voice. It sounds like she's a transformer almost. It's this resonant voice.
I was getting like Dead by Dawn. Very Sam Raimi, Evil Dead.
It sounded too digital for me for Sam Raimi, but there was something going on. But with the fangs showing through the sheet and things, that was really cool. They also, though, I guess just pushing across into a vampire is enough to kill it. Because that's what they do here, is they just shove across into her back, and then she just disappears in a cloud of smoke.
Well, you know, they don't have a cross. They are in a mortuary, and they got tongue depressors. There's some slapstick to the idea of how do we make this work? Is the tape binding it? Do we need to recite some religious passages before it's a real crucifix?
Yeah, they got to bless it.
Yeah. Alfre Woodard is doing a more comedic take than other people here. Like, you know, she's like, oh, hell, when the body starts moving, and she stabs the face and no blood comes out. And again, she's the one that figures out that even after you get bit, if you go grab a rabies shot, you'll be okay.
Yes, the same as rabies?
I guess so.
The fact that a rabies shot fixes her, but then later on, when Susan gets bit, she's like, oh, it's no good. We can't do that again.
She didn't like Susan, right? That's something else. It's too late for her. I'm like, were you there with the stopwatch? Or maybe you're just okay with it.
Yeah, that's how I read it.
Yeah, I just feel like the one and done rabies shot is weird writing. Because if you're going to set up that you have a cure for vampirism, then you use that cure for vampirism again later.
Yeah, no, just alert the authorities, like, hey, there's vampires that exist, but just let's get a lot of rabies shots. Like, that's our vaccine for these.
I mean, if you think about rabies being administered largely by bats, then it kind of makes sense. And I mean, they have a reason for it, Arnie. They're saying with enough time, you can definitely look at Susan and see that she's already developing fangs. Whereas here, they take that tongue depressor crucifix.
She does it right away.
And yeah, she does it right away, and she throws some kind of antibiotic or something into the neck wound. She's treating it instantly. And so they have the crucifix test. They hold it up. It doesn't glow. Okay, she's good. Whereas Susan is glowing the crucifixes. That's how we know. Silly as though that may be.
But wouldn't you use this rabies thing more than once if you introduced it as a plot device?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't need it to happen. I think it's just kind of a fun thing.
It could have been a major plot development in the original cut. Who knows?
Or, yeah, maybe, you know, they'll weaponize it later if there was a sequel and they'll go on the vampire hunt. That's kind of what they do in the book. For this moment, it's just a way of us. Look, I'm not even feeling like Alfre Woodard is out of the woods. It wouldn't surprise me if later, you know, they're all huddled around and she sprouts fangs or something.
I thought for sure that's what was going to happen.
Yeah, but they're telling me that she's okay, so okay, maybe. And it turns out she is. So yes, we have a cure for other movies or sequels to utilize. But what's most important out of this is she's now a believer. And they're all going to go to the authority, which is the town drunk, also known as the priest Callahan. I love that they're having him read Dracula, and he has that great line. You know lying is a sin, right?
Callahan is one of the most interesting characters in the novel. I perhaps have even more affinity for him because he comes back in the Dark Tower series. He escapes Barlow in the book. He just leaves town, and then we find out what happens to him in the Dark Tower novels and things like that, and he has a redemption arc.
If you remember, I don't think anybody does, but the Rob Lowe version actually has a frame story built around the character, that he is years later, played by James Cromwell, living as a vampire working a soup kitchen. And they make the sort of the new element about that. But yes, he's not supposed to die here. And in some ways you could argue he could be a main character. Again, so many opportunities for a focal character. Which one do you choose? I'm going to pick the kid, because he's been tied upside down, waiting to be drained. And because he studied Houdini, he gets out and takes a fireplace poker and beats the shit out of Straker.
Oh my God. This kid is a badass. He does not fuck around. I couldn't believe it. The first time a human fights back, it's against another human, not a vampire. And that blood splatters against the wall and splatters all over Mark. I'm like, holy shit, you just straight up murdered a man right there.
Now, a familiar. I mean, he is under the power of Barlow, but yes, again, it really signals the idea that they wanted to make this kid the star. And it's a dramatic moment. He comes like a badass into this church just to fill his thermos with holy water. He's going to go back and kill some more vampires. And they're like, let's tag around with the 11-year-old. We'll go back to the house and have another vampire attack. What else?
Yeah, I love it. Mark's going to go in there and tell him all about vampire lore because Ben, our main character journalist, yet knows nothing.
He's definitely receding from the storyline, as it is. Again, if they're going back to the Marston house, this is where you bring up the Marston house. What it means to him, what happened to him here, why he would come back and research this and be so curious about it. And again, I don't think every version of Salem's Lot has to hold on to it. If you just want to make it vampire-centric, great. Then it gives you the responsibility of coming up with something else about Ben that's interesting. If it's not the Marston house, what does he know about vampires? Is he a horror writer? How do you make him useful if you're not going to follow what King's novel did? I guess he's helpful here because he kills the school teacher. They get a ladder, they go down into the basement, and we find out that this beloved Bill Camp character is indeed turned. And yeah, you don't even have to get a hammer and nail in stakes in this movie. You can just grab a stake and shove it into people.
They're very soft.
Yeah, I like that in From Dusk Till Dawn, they actually explained that. Like, vampires' chest bones become soft, so that's why, because it takes a lot of force to puncture a chest bone. And here, yeah, they do it very easily, but it's fine. I didn't regret seeing the teacher die.
I mean, I kind of like this character. I mean, I do think in terms of empathy, which we all admit is rather low with all the characters here, he was easily one of the most relatable.
I agree, and yet I don't care when he dies. I feel it, again, you sense something that's not there, but you should care about this moment. This should be a tragic thing that this beloved side character has died. And I'm like, okay, move on to the next scene, because I do not care about you.
More to the point, these characters don't care about it either. They're immediately like, all right, he's dead. What else do we do? Let's all split up. We've only got a few more hours till sundown.
It is shocking, because I thought Ben and Matt were, good friends at this point, and, again, it's all about Susie, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah, when Ben accompanies Susie back home, they want to save her mother. We had seen in an earlier scene, she went into the antique store, and Straker must have said something seductive to her, because she's now convinced that she's going to be taken care of, whisked away, and she's always wanted her daughter to get back with Floyd Tibbetts, who, blink and you miss him, is the vampire biting into Susie's neck.
Yeah, there was one scene earlier on where it was mentioned he was sweet on Susan, and yeah, this gives Susan, again, a bit more something to do in the story by having her mother become the new right-hand person for Barlow, but it is a strange turn I didn't see coming, and it almost becomes comical because this person playing Susan's mother, Anne, is playing it to an extreme. It's almost like
Hallmark.
My go-to was, if she was a bit older, it's like a murderous granny from the Beverly Hillbillies.
That's why I thought she might have been the one who killed Ben's parents or something, because I don't understand why she acts like this.
She doesn't like Ben because he's an outsider. Now, I would like to remind her, he's an outsider with a lot of money and a successful writing career, and her daughter would do well to hitch herself to him instead of this Floyd, what's his name, that seems to be going nowhere in life. But hey, whatever. They want to establish that this town is insular. They don't like outsiders, which is ironic because all the main characters are people that just showed up in town for the first time last week. And while they're trying to rescue Anne, it ends up with, Susan bit. We also see that Callahan has accompanied Mark to go and try and convince his parents that they should also hide at the church. And we get a very quick death for both of them.
It would matter more if we'd met Mark's parents before and if they'd actually been characters in this. As it is, it just seems very abrupt, and it only matters because I know of the importance of this scene in the book and how this is a big talking scene between Barlow and Father Callahan, and here, Barlow's gonna come in and, say one line to Callahan and then feed on him.
It's enough for him to lose faith.
Yeah, I like it. It's visual, though, Arnie. I mean, why have long speeches when you can just have the light go out of the glow stick? He's holding the cross. He's like, I'm a priest, get back, watch out for me. And it's just kind of funny to watch the vampire snicker as his faith literally, we can tell, it falters. The bulb goes out, and now what's he going to do? It's not clear whether he dies or not. We see the kid running away and we hear the screaming, but I suppose if there was a sequel, you could include Callahan.
You could. Now, the other thing is, this is our first real good look at Barlow. He's in bright lights, and they've done some strange things with his design. The veins on his head that I think get even redder as he feeds reminded me of some kind of vine or something. It didn't look organic. It didn't look like human anatomy going on there with this, and it almost was like a weird series of mohawks on him.
I mean, I think it looks okay. Again, it just isn't very creative. They didn't want to stray from Tobe Hooper. This feels as much a remake of Tobe Hooper as it does a interpretation of King's book. And maybe you want a monster. Maybe it's helpful to have one vampire be Straker, the seductive human, and one be, repulsive, veiny, big-fanged. It works well enough. Meanwhile, Mark has to go hide in his treehouse, and again, if it had lasted longer, this could be really frightening, that he's trying to fight off a tree full of vampire kids, grabbing the flag and using the sharp end to puncture them as they try to come through all the windows and hatches.
Yeah, I love the shot of all the vampires around the tree looking up with their glowing eyes and things. I really like that. But are the rules for the treehouse the same as a regular house? Do you have to be invited into a treehouse?
Yeah, any dwelling, and people can live in a treehouse.
It just was strange to me that they just couldn't, reach in and grab him.
Yeah, they try. I mean, I think they would have. He shut all the windows and doors. His eyes didn't glass over. They can't convince him. He's onto their tricks, and he's just got to wait out the night.
That was weird, too, because Mark just disappears now for a while and shows up again the next morning. I guess he just spent all night in the treehouse.
Yeah, this is where he'll be. Meanwhile, Cody was tasked with getting the sheriff, who, this is the same, I think, in all the versions. The lawman whose duty it is to protect the town is packing up the car, is getting out of town. This is the only version I know of that kills him, though. We see him right away. We see him tell the doctor that he's not going to fight. But later, when she's at the church, his corpse will be thrown through the stained glass window.
Yeah, I think even in the book, he got away. He just left town, and that was it.
So here, I guess, again, to make it more exciting, to increase the body count, to give horror fans more things that thrill them. I mean, I don't think these are bad instincts.
I think this film was made for someone with more my perspective. If you don't know that book, probably the better. And I agree with a lot of the, if you're going to cut this down, I think they're leaving in the stuff you want to see. My problem is I don't care about anyone, and that has become a real big problem by this third act.
Right. They could have thrown Ben through the stained glass window, and it would have been all the same to me.
Yeah, if I hadn't read the book and seen the other versions, I would have had trouble keeping track who was who. Who was the school teacher? Who was the writer? Because so little is made of them. But I do like Alfre Woodard's line when the constable gets thrown through the window. Oh, he was useless anyway. I mean, he really was. So is most people in this town.
Ben does have one great moment, and it's right here. He's brought Susan to the church. She's not having it. She's writhing. This is where we've talked about the doctor being instead of getting the rabies shot, getting the stake, saying it's too late for her. And she goes running out into the street. He follows her, and then, he looks around, and everywhere lining the sidewalks, lining the roofs, he's surrounded by vampires.
This is the shot from the trailer that made me go, oh, this is going to be good. Because, he runs out there, the camera pans to the side, comes back, and there's just vampires everywhere. And I'm like, Hopefully you have not turned this into a drinking game because you're dead by now. But again, the strength of this film, every time we say it, take a shot, is the visuals. And like, it's a really great composition.
Yeah, no, and scary. I mean, just a truly terrifying moment to realize, oh, I've been tricked. And now how am I going to get back? You know, she throws him a steak, and I guess I'll repeat myself again. It's just over too fast. He's taken up into the air, and then a second later, he drops down with the stake in Mike's chest. Mike, by the way, was the grave digger. So if you can keep track of this, that's who's dead next.
Yeah, it really helped the second viewing that I was like, oh yeah, I remember who wore that t-shirt.
But it could have been Floyd Tibbetts. It could have been anyone. Again, who are all these characters? It could have been the real estate guy from the opening. It's like, who these people are does not matter.
Not at all. And it's just so shocking to me how fast we're getting to the end, because now we're down to the only ones left are Mark, Ben, and Cody.
And Mark is doing most of the work. He's going door to door trying to find vampires and finding that the town is empty. And we have these nice little moments where, you know, there's milk bottles still sitting on the porch and the mailboxes are stuffed and no one's been getting the mail. They do nice little moments of getting to the idea that they are in a ghost town now. And so where are the corpses? He does have to kill Danny. He made a vow that he would when he came through the window. And Danny comes at him again when he busts into the antique shop. And again, you just have to poke him with a stake.
And this one seemed more accidental. You see Danny's face and Danny's all like victorious, and then it slowly changes as he realizes, oh, I just ran into that stake.
But yeah, this kid has just buried his parents. He's killed his new best friend. He's got nothing going for him. He doesn't care. I don't know if this is tough so much as just like disconnected, like no emotional reading at all to this kid. I'm worried about him, that he can see this much slaughter and be disaffected.
He's a psychopath, just does not affect him.
He's new in town. He barely knew this kid.
It was his only friend. I'll just put it that way. And again, his parents, he threw sheets over them, not shedding a tear.
He is a badass, though. I mean, he is a vampire hunter. You talk about a sequel. I want a sequel that just focuses on him kicking ass and taking names.
It's just funny because in DMZ, every other scene was him talking to the ghost of his grandpa saying, I can't let you go. And this one, he can't kill people fast enough.
He has the highest kill rate of the whole movie, no doubt, including several humans.
He kills more than Barlow, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, once we get to this drive-in climax, he's the one that does the most here. It is Ben that notices all the cars are gone. And so what does that mean? This is a clever twist, a new change that Gary Dauberman has brought in that I think is helpful. I think it's fun to bring it all back to the drive-in. Makes it feel fresher than going to the Marston house, which hasn't been that interesting.
I mean, like I said earlier, the Marston house is not a character or even really an important location in this version. If you had that opening at the Marsden house, I think you would want this ending to be at the Marsden house. The addition of a drive-in movie theater, all completely new for this. It was a place where the town could come together and we could be given a little bit of exposition about this person's secret and that person's secret. And it's a place where you see movies that people might be nostalgic for. But yeah, that vampires are now using car trunks as coffins. I guess, is that a vampire version of a mobile home?
I guess they're magic because I hate to be this guy, but I'm going to be this guy. This is 1975. There's no child, like, latches inside the trunks that are mandated now, so you can pop that open to get out. I guess they just magically open these from the inside to get out, but it really bugged me.
The whole town does it. Earlier in the movie, you saw that like families would sneak their kids in because they didn't want to pay the $1.75.
Oh, they set it up, I know. But there was someone to pull that latch and open the trunk for them.
You're right. They needed assistance. But I guess when you're vampires, you could pick the lock with your talons. I don't know.
And they just need to be in the shade because there's going to be a whole thing. We got to knock over that screen. So the sun, because it's setting and it's going behind it, and as that shadow grows, like, it's very literal. Like, as long as they stay right behind in that shadow, they could be out during the day or something. Or at dusk, at least.
This reminds me of how silly it was in Blade, where Steven Dorff just put on good sunscreen and he was able to go out in the sunlight.
I'm okay with it. Again, it's sundown and they want to play with the idea that more or less, it's almost night. It's in that quasi time where it's kind of dangerous, and they can pop the trunk and drool and look and be like, I'm going to get you in a minute as soon as like the shadow falls. I'm totally with it.
And you say it's almost sundown. Honestly, it's always almost sundown here.
They need to do stuff during the day.
Yeah, it seems like they're like, oh, the sun goes down in an hour. Let's now go do our attack instead of doing it right at sunup. It is always the sun is setting on them during this entire movie.
Admittedly, yeah, there are whole days that pass that I don't know what they were doing. But we're in the very end of the movie, and this is a climax that's fun. I think that a lot of things get taken out really fast. First, Cody, should be said, Alfre Woodard, they find Susan in her trunk. She was going to be the one to stick her, because again, I don't think she likes the bitch. But yeah, Mom comes back with the shotgun, blows her away, and then Kid gets in a car, runs Anne down, and then, yeah, in the movie's it feels like from a different film, right? On one level, I like it, but on the other hand, I'm like, this feels like Monster Squad when he brings down the screen.
Yes.
I was thinking Monster Squad when he went into the church to refill the container of holy water, but that was also, I think, a Lost Boys scene. But here, let's not undersell this. A 11-year-old boy gets behind the wheel of a car and mows down a human woman, his second human kill of the film.
He loves murdering.
Yeah, I'm worried about him. I'm serious.
He watches those horror films, and this is what happens to you.
Right, yes. I think that there's a case to be made about his desensitized attitude towards life.
But I do love that, yeah, he rams that car under the screen, taking out all the support posts, giving us some really underfunded CGI fire people. This fire is not good, especially the close-ups we get on some burning vampire that's walking closer and closer to Ben. This is really... I'm glad they didn't put this in a theater, because I would have been very mad to pay a ticket price to see this level of effects.
I mean, yeah, it's a computer-generated effect. It would have been much better if it were a body burn with the stuntman, but again, do you huff and puff when an effect shot looks awful and walk out? In most movies, I think we've seen a range of convincing to not convincing. This is one of the least convincing moments in what is largely a good-looking movie.
I'll agree it mostly looks good due to the framing, the color use. I do like the vampires, but the special effects are not up to snuff. And this is just, when we talk about this movie being direct to streaming, I'm more accepting of shit in streaming than I am if I'm paying $20 for a ticket. And so I'll let it roll that the fire looks so bad here, but they would have needed to do more here if they really thought this was theatrical.
Yeah, I mean, it's a corny but fun image to watch the screen go down and all these vampires that thought they were in the shade and now exposed to the last remnants of sunlight and burning up. They know it looks bad, Arnie. It's not like we have tons of shots of them. We immediately see that Ben and Mark are now prioritizing finding Barlow. He has to be here too. And they find the delivery truck, but can't get it open in time.
Were they getting ready? Like, were the vampires going to get out and all just, like, drive to the next town? Like, it was weird that he's just sitting in a truck.
Maybe they were going to watch Night Moves. I don't know.
Once they kill everyone in town, they get to watch movies at the drive-in?
Yeah, I'm not sure why the drive-in is safer than their own homes. But I guess they were just avoiding... They didn't think that these last humans would figure out their hiding place, I guess.
But if you remember, Susan is still undead in town, and I did not remember. I kind of thought with all the chaos at the church that Susan was taken care of. But it's going to end up being Mark versus Barlow while Ben has to face off against Susan.
And I jumped. I will say that it was, I should have seen it coming, but when they're in the concession booth and peeking out the window and Susan jumps Ben, that got me. I just wasn't thinking about Susan. So yeah, this is, again, if they had been able to sustain it for several minutes, this would be really exciting. As it is, it's a jump scare that wraps things up in about 65 seconds.
But it's what draws Ben away as Mark is under that screen and Barlow's getting to him, almost reaches out.
Why is he turning on the headlights? What help does that provide him?
I thought that was to draw out Barlow so he could attack him. to like show them where they were. That's what I wrote down in my notes, so that was my thought, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
I can't really follow. It's not like headlights or sunlight. I mean, maybe.
Well, but it lets you know where they are. They're saying, hey, come and get me. This is where I am. I don't know. You could have screamed. You could have done a lot of things.
But he has nothing to fight him with. Why would he want that to happen? I think he's hiding.
Because it's the end of the movie.
Yeah, and because he's a badass kid that seems to have no fear at all, and that will probably catch up with him one day, but not here.
Well, it almost catches up with him here because it's the one time Mark doesn't get the hero moment.
Because Ben is the main character, Arnie. You forgot.
Yeah. And he's already taken out his girlfriend in a very brief, like she had him down with a chair. He flips positions and stakes her, and light goes out of her eyes.
Yeah, it's kind of a sad moment. As much as I liked any character in here, liked Susan.
Yeah. All versions kill her, though. I've never seen one where she lived.
No. And that's true to the book as well. I think Toby Hooper's did it closest to the book, where he goes back and faces her.
Yeah, she almost seduces him. Again, she tries to use the love thing to bite his neck.
But here, we think maybe Mark's days of vampire hunting are behind him. Barlow almost has him. But no, Ben stakes Barlow through the head. And I'm like, wait a second. Staking a vampire in the head doesn't do anything, though. You have to stake them in the heart. I guess it's enough to daze Barlow, and then he does stab him in the heart as well.
Yeah, I mean, anticlimactic. They just do it because they feel like it's cool to watch a through-the-mouth impaled moment, and then he pulls it out, and we see Ben through the hole in the back of Barlow's neck. Again, that's Dead by Dawn, Army of Darkness. It feels like they're going for Sam Raimi in this moment, and that would be fine if I felt like the whole movie was going for that, but it feels tonally off.
And yet it's the stuff that I'll remember from this.
And the movie's end is abrupt and unfulfilling because Ben and Mark get in a car. They don't even really know each other all that well. Whereas in the book, I really felt like there was a paternal relationship forming. They really had time to bond. They did a lot together. Here, they have spent maybe 10 minutes together in the whole movie, and they're just going to drive off together now, and I'm left with a lot of questions. More than Mark. Mark's like, where do we go now? I'm like, well, they're going to come after you. Yeah, they're probably going to think you had something to do with this. Hell, Mark, you did kill people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll be known as serial killers that murdered a town. Maybe no one notices because Jerusalem Slot is not important. I just like Gordon Lightfoot. I like that they used to bookend this movie, his sundown. I think it was an appropriately kind of goofy way of having a vampire tune.
I didn't care for the end credits song. I let it play in case there was a scene, and I thought, it's okay, but I liked the score better than the music.
Gordon Lightfoot is 70s.
Yes.
It's appropriate that they use him. And again, I never thought, in all my years of listening to this song, I never thought of vampires. And now I never won't.
So Jacob Stewart, do you recommend 2024's Salem's Lot? Jacob.
Yeah, because we can't review 2022 Salem's Lot, which probably would have been a very different thing. Like, look, this is a compromised film, obviously. Like, you can feel it as you watch it. So that's not good. But this film's also not totally bad. Like, there are interesting things. We've talked about the visuals. Like, I do not care about any, like, talking pieces. Like, how do you do a 3-hour film and you cut out, if there was any great drama or dialogue scenes, you have excised all of them because there's nothing outside of vampire stuff going on that sticks to me in this movie. Like, everything is boring. All these characters are boring. And that is the biggest problem, is while there's some really great looking frames, Stuart, you called it out, like, you never get to dwell on those. It's like, here it is, and then we're going to move on, and, like, here's characters you don't care about for 10 minutes, and then here's another cool frame. It's hard for me to even recommend this as just, like, a cool-looking horror film where you're going to see some really cool visuals, because they're very short, and you will not care about anyone or anything that happens in between them. And that's why I thought I kept falling asleep. Like, I was so confused because, yes, when Ben becomes the hero at the end of this film, I'm like, I forgot about him. I forgot that he was supposed to be our main focus. And that's all because, obviously, this was cut down from 3 hours. But I got to review what's in front of me. And It's a really great looking film that will kind of bore you. And yeah, if this was more campy with the glowing crosses, I don't know. Whatever they gave us is not what they should have given us. Either you really whittle this down and make it a Lost Boys ripoff, or you have to make this into some kind of longer series and get into all the history of the Marsden house, all that stuff that I guess people find interesting in that book that I have not gotten out of 3 versions of this story. But yeah, if they ever release a book of frames of this film, buy that, but do not watch this movie. It's disconnected and not satisfying.
Stuart.
Yeah, as the fan of Salem's Lot, the novel, it continues to be this frustration that we get so close, that each version gets some element right that the others did not, and still can't cross the finish line to being like a really good adaptation. I want to, address Tobe Hooper watching it again. I know why I loved it as a kid. I know why I didn't love it when we reviewed it. It's got great moments with a whole lot of filler. And depending on your level of patience is how much you're going to enjoy 1979 as an adult. Return to Salem's Lot, the straight-to-tape thing. I know it's trash. It's got very little to do with Stephen King's work, but it has one thing that none of the other ones do, and that is an absolutely gonzo, electrifying performance by Samuel Fuller. He makes that Brown Arrow fun, and you want somebody in this cast of characters to seize you, grab a hold, and make you care. I don't think that ever happens in any of the other Salem's Lot. The Rob Lowe one is the one that gets the Marsden house, is the one that can Shirley Jackson the importance of that house and sees the town, the metaphors of dying small town America. It works in that way. But again, so much bad CGI work, and Rob Lowe is no good. I was really hoping this one could seal the deal. And, it is clearly the best looking one. By keeping it technically polished the way that it does, most of the scenes are gripping, or at least engaging. I want to enjoy this world. I'm sucked into this town. I'm here for it. But unfortunately, this thing has been streamlined so much, we just whip right through it, to the point that I think we're all saying, you won't care what happens. As much as you might want to advocate that all this is a vampire story and bring on the fangs and blood, actually, if we have no attachment to any character, then it is a rather boring montage. And it doesn't matter how good looking the individual moments are. It's not scary. And so, I don't know, in the end, I agree with Stephen King. Why not release it? It's not an embarrassment. There's no reason to bury it. Fans will want to see this. If you like the novel, you'll want to take a look at what they did here. And some things are good. Many things are not. I wish I could review the 3-hour cut, because I think that's recommendable. My guess is, if you gave me 40 more minutes of character stuff, I would say, yeah, I like this one. This one works. But in this version, I can't hold on to anything. It just slips through my fingers, and a good movie drifts away. I know that Stephen King, in early praises of this, talked about it having slow build atmosphere, and he must have seen a different cut than I did, because what I saw was people that didn't want to spend any time on a moment that didn't have fangs. Salem's Lot is more than that. It's better than that. And so I'm going to say mild not recommend once again.
3 for 3. I feel bad giving this a not recommend, because I really do feel like at some point in time they could release an extended cut that I would recommend. Because, again, the visuals are here, and I like the score a lot, and it works for me as a Cliff Notes of that book. And remember this thing that happened in the book that was cool? Here it is, acted out. But it just is missing so much to build character that it doesn't work as a standalone movie. It's frustrating for me, because I really do think Dauberman has decent instincts when it comes to the stuff we've seen him do, and yet, with the exception of that first It, nothing he's done that we've reviewed, the Annabelle stuff he wrote, and then this, it just doesn't hit the mark. It's close, but it's just not quite there, And I feel like he has the talent to take it over the finish line, and I just haven't seen him do that yet.
Or he did, and we weren't allowed to see that cut.
Exactly. So, we don't give reviews to other cuts of movies when they release extended versions on Blu-ray or whatever, but I almost feel like if this does get a 3-hour release, it would almost deserve it, because I feel what we're watching here is so chopped up. It feels bad giving it a not recommend, but for what they've released, yeah, it's a not recommend.
Yeah, unless it's the pandemic and there's a Snyder cut and where you have to fill up stuff because there's no new movies. I think that's the only time we've gone back.
And I think the only reason why this got released was, Stephen King endorsed it, and there was also that writers/actors strike that just made content kind of dry up. So they needed something for October. Max had nothing else, so here you go. And so I guess in thinking about ranking it, because I do try to keep in mind where this might fall, I think it is. You said top 25. I think it's more or less around 23, 24 for me. It ranks with the TV miniseries that some people say they love, like the Tim Curry It or the Stand, The Mist. Some of these things that some people say, oh, one of the good Stephen King that I ended up giving a red arrow to. I think it's kind of in that zone of like being almost good, but not quite.
I'd have to revisit those others and have them more fresh in my memory and able to rank the adaptations of Salem's Lot, but I meant what I said. This is probably somewhere in the top 25. It's almost good. I almost like it.
I could see people enjoying this just for the vampire stuff and go, no, it's a fun film. It's got kills.
I'm going to underline that. I think some people will be okay with this movie. And probably if they haven't read the novel and have much feeling about what it should be like, they could probably just go, wasn't that bad. And it isn't. It just isn't as good as it should be. We're done with King, probably for 2024. I'm looking at the months ahead. There's not much left, and there's just no room in the end to get to Dreamcatcher yet. But I see that theatrically speaking, a new Stephen King is coming in February. They got a teaser trailer out, and it looked pretty good. Dare I get my hopes up for a Green Arrow after all of this time? But Osgood Perkins, son of Anthony Perkins, director of Longlegs, has finally adapted a short story that I really always felt should be a movie. He did Skeleton Crew's The Monkey.
Oz Perkins is what got me excited. I've seen all his films, and I really like his sense of style when it comes to horror, so maybe he could give us a good King one.
I think so. Did you see that wind-up monkey? It is terrifying alone. Most of the trailer is just showing the monkey crashing the cymbals, and it's got me.
I loved Longlegs this year, and so that's the reason why I have hope. You tell me Stephen King's short story expanded into feature length. I'm still suffering a little PTSD from Boogeyman.
I forgot about that one.
The fact that Osgood Perkins is behind this, though, I'm thinking it could be one of the best, honestly.
Yeah, and good cast, too. Tatiana Maslany, I liked her in Orphan Black, less so in She-Hulk, but she's there. Elijah Wood, Theo James. It really could be top 10 King. So fingers crossed for February. We'll return to King around that time as well. And Dreamcatcher, I'm telling you, it's not good, but I'm really looking forward to it.
I can't wait to discuss Duddits. I've only seen the movie once. I've never read the book, but Duddits is forever in my mind.
In the meantime, if you want to see more horror content, needless horror franchise extensions from a streaming service, this Friday we're covering Apartment 7A. It's a prequel to Rosemary's Baby that finally tells you what happens to Mia Farrow's friend that fell out of the window. Spoiler alert, she died.
I didn't know we needed a whole movie about that, but here we are.
Yeah, they do it frame by frame of her falling and falling. No, I'm kidding. There's a whole story there, and we'll be discussing it for those that donated for Rosemary's Baby back in the day, or those that want to catch it now, become a Dark Child donor and hear all about it this Friday.
And that's not it for direct-to-streaming movies. We've got another one next week, 3 in a row between Salem's Lot, Apartment 7A, and next week, Hellboy is direct-to-streaming. That fourth Hellboy film, The Crooked Man, I believe it's called.
Yeah, I actually think that if you live in Europe, you have to pay full movie ticket price.
It got a theatrical release over there.
Yeah, I feel grateful that I can just click a button and watch it on my TV because boy does it look like a fan film. Hope to be wrong. Hellboy's a weird one because I don't feel like it's ever totally worked as a movie, but this one really doesn't look like it works like a movie.
It doesn't look like a movie.
Well, I'm going in with an open mind. I like Hellboy as a character, and so I'm interested to see what they can do. But much like Salem's Lot, I'm glad I'm not buying a ticket to see it.
I mean, you still gotta pay to digitally rent it.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's probably for purchase only, isn't it?
It's probably the same price as a movie ticket.
And it's forever going to be in my Apple iTunes library now. Forever, when I go to watch Hellraiser or anything that starts with an H, there is going to be Hellboy the Crooked Man. So thank you for listening to Now Playing. Jacob Stewart, thank you for joining me. It's been good to return to Salem's Lot, but until next time, ciao, Constable.
The town will burn.
It will drive them out of their hiding places.
All of them?
It will purify Salem's Lot. And the others will be on the run and on the hunt. For us. For us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Now Playing, and we hope you've enjoyed the show.
I just don't like things that suck your blood and have conversations afterwards.
Now that you've heard the movie review, head to booksandnachos.com to hear reviews and analysis of the original Stephen King Salem's Lot novel and short stories Jerusalem's Lot and One for the Road from the Night Shift collection.
Literature's become elitist. It's like black and white photography.
And come back to NowPlayingPodcast.com to hear our reviews of other Stephen King movies, such as Carrie, and join us each week for another new King movie review.
You take your mother and anyone else that you can persuade to go.
In the archives section of our website, you can also hear reviews of other films such as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Saw, Riddick, Friday the 13th, the Avengers films, Star Trek, and more. Find hundreds of movie review podcasts at NowPlayingPodcast.com.
Why don't you come up and have a drink one night?
To tell you the truth, Richard, the place scares me.
You can also follow Now Playing on Facebook and Twitter, where the hosts post new episode announcements and written movie reviews. The links to our social media pages can be found at NowPlayingPodcast.com.
Whoever feeds you is your God.
Support from listeners like you help keep Now Playing operating. You can find a link to donate using PayPal at the bottom of our website, NowPlayingPodcast.com.
What would you give for this miserable boy?
You can also help out Now Playing by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. A link to Now Playing's iTunes listing can be found at NowPlayingPodcast.com.
Only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Now Playing's Salem's Lot retrospective series is edited by Heath, Santiago, and Arnie.
Don't you guys ever sleep around here? I mean, don't you even get tired?
Now Playing credit narration by Brock.
What a rude boy talking to his father like that. And in front of company.
The Salem's Lot films are the property of their copyright holders, and no infringement is intended.
Let it be. Sometimes these badges get in the way.
The opinions expressed on Now Playing are those of the individual hosts and may not reflect the opinion of Inganza Media Incorporated.
Would you feel more comfortable if we stepped into the confessional?
Now Playing is a Venganza Media production, copyright 2024. All rights reserved, and no part of this show may be reproduced, repurposed, or redistributed without the written permission of Venganza Media Incorporated.
What do we do now?
We make our escape.
It's been a gruesome day. Rest in peace.